Thank you, Simeon. Welcome back from lunch, everybody. So I understand we need to try and make a little bit of time back. Oops. Oh, sorry. Skip the slides forward. I want to talk a bit about risk management. The things we do, the things we don't do, the things we ought to be doing in the way we build the Mojaloop software to manage risks for our stakeholders. So I want to remind everybody what our context is. Mojaloop software is designed, it is intended to form the backbone of nation-scale inclusive instant payment schemes. These schemes are very important pieces of national financial infrastructure, which are regulated. It's highly unlikely that a scheme would operate that wasn't regulated. These payment schemes tend to facilitate life-critical activities of very large numbers of people, like buying food, clean drinking water, paying for electricity and other utility bills. Adopters of Mojaloop software, regulators, the people transacting through the payment schemes, they deserve and demand an extremely high level of quality, security, reliability, and resilience from Mojaloop software and schemes built on Mojaloop software. What's a risk? When I was preparing this presentation, I had a good feeling, a good instinct as to what risk is. But I took the time to go and look up some definitions. The Cambridge English Dictionary says a risk is the possibility of something bad happening. It's quite a broad definition. But it turns out that the things we might consider bad depend on our particular view of the world, our particular circumstances as stakeholders. In Mojaloop, stakeholders are our adopters, people that regulate the payment schemes and the people that operate them, and the people that transact through them. So why do the Mojaloop Foundation care about risk management and risks? Well, risk management, anybody who's worked on a very large, sizable, important project would, I estimate, know what risk management is. We do risk management because ultimately the safety, the reliability, and the success of our projects, and in this case, Mojaloop deployments, can be greatly affected by the way we manage risk. If we don't spend enough time thinking about the things that might go wrong and actively trying to prevent those things going wrong and the bad outcomes they cause, we are not being diligent and responsible members of the Mojaloop community. The Mojaloop Foundation has a special role to play in the community by governing the way our technology, our code base is developed and evolves and is maintained to try to ensure those properties remain. It needs to be safe, reliable, secure. Sorry, one final point on that slide. In many regulated domains, especially financials and national infrastructure, formal risk management that's conducted strongly, embedded into project processes, is usually table stakes. You don't get into the room unless you do it and you do it well. And it's typical that you will be audited by regulators on the way you manage risks. So the Mojaloop Foundation care a great deal about this. Types of areas where our various stakeholders might encounter risk: security, compliance, operations, finance, financial management, business continuity, reputation, scalability, performance, things we all know about, project management and development also. On the next few slides, I've got some examples, and they are just a few selected examples of risks, mostly in Mojaloop type projects, but many of them apply to many different types of software project or large projects. Data breaches, well, I think we probably all know how serious data breaches can be. Financial loss, reputational damage. Malware and ransomware, unfortunately, is a big part of our everyday lives. Insider threats. I'm sure those of us who have ever worked in financial institutions will be aware of the risk of insiders behaving badly. Weak authentication and access control. We don't want to leave the door open to people with bad intentions. Compliance and regulatory risk, big area for projects like Mojaloop deployments. Data protection regulations, well, in the modern world, consumers care a great deal about the privacy and the security of their data. There are regulations springing up, evolving around the world that we have to comply with. We have to be a trustworthy place for customer data, personally identifiable information. If we get things wrong, we might be in for some hefty fines, legal action, or in worst cases, suspension or loss of our operating license. AML and KYC violations, well, increasingly, and especially with cross-border, the new Mojaloop features for cross-border, we need to think very carefully about how we manage those risks. Another semi-regulatory issue is financial reporting. If we misreport or fail to meet reporting standards required by regulators, again, we're in for some pretty nasty sanctions. Operational risks, system downtime, we all know how damaging that can be, especially as we're talking about national financial infrastructure projects here. Payment schemes that are countrywide, even region-wide, as we've seen with the COMESA deployment. Downtime in systems like that can have serious economic consequences. Dependency risks. You will have heard people speak so far this week about deploying and operating Mojaloop in the cloud. Well, that has its own risks. We need to think about those. If we rely on those third-party vendors and they let us down, we might have some bad outcomes. Financial risks, one that's very dear to my heart, accounting accuracy risk. Discrepancies or inconsistencies in accounting records might lead to costly disputes, very large losses potentially, reputational damage, regulatory sanctions, loss of operating licenses. It's probably the worst possible thing that a payments platform could get wrong would be accounting. So we care very deeply about that. Fraud and financial crime, again, another huge area of activity in the Mojaloop community. Business continuity, disaster recovery and backups. Things do go wrong. Why do we even have the term disaster recovery? Because we know things can go wrong. If we know something might go wrong, and it's not just a theoretical risk in that case, we know data centers go down, we know power outages happen. Lack of redundancy. If we don't have enough redundancy in our systems, we're risking prolonged service disruption. Reputational risk. Customer trust, massively important if we're trying to replace cash in a national economy. Security incidents can erode customer trust very quickly. Compliance violations and minor service disruptions, they all contribute to eroding customer trust. Again, not something we want to happen if we're trying to replace cash. Brand damage. Well, we're operating a scheme. Things go wrong. Maybe fraud becomes prolific because we've unintentionally left a door open for fraudsters. We mishandle customer data even. There are numerous instances, at least in the British press, of executives leaving laptops on trains or in taxis with sensitive customer data on. These are all pretty serious risks. Scalability and performance. If we can't handle the amount of traffic that's being demanded, peaks in traffic, can cause processing to slow down, transactions to take too long. Ultimately, we end up with dissatisfied customers. Brand damage, reputational damage, latency issues. Well, if it takes a long time for you to get a payment through to buy some groceries, if that takes more than a few seconds, then we've failed to replace cash. Project management, while we're implementing, maintaining and operating these programs to bring these inclusive instant payment systems into our markets, it's very easy for scope to creep as stakeholders have high ambitions. But we need to be careful to manage complexity, make sure we hit our deadlines. Innovation risk. This is an interesting one. Relying on new technologies or unproven methodologies. Something that happens an awful lot in the software industry. New technologies become available very rapidly these days, and it's all too easy to see a shiny new toy on the shelf that appears to solve a particular technical problem or make something more efficient, cheaper. But how do we trust? How do we know those components are trustworthy? What due diligence should we be doing to make sure they are trustworthy and that they have a place in our code base? So, risk management, understanding risks has been around for a very long time. But ultimately, if we don't spend enough time thinking about what might go wrong and really working hard to try and prevent bad outcomes, we're not being diligent and responsible. Those of us who've had positions of responsibility in large operations will tell you many horror stories about how service disruption, engineering mistakes, human error can cause catastrophic issues. There are many people around the room who I'm sure will delight in telling you the horror stories of their past. A recent case in the UK, some of you may have heard about, I'm not sure if it made the international news, was a case called Horizon, where a contractor built an accounting system for the National Post Office in the UK. And the software turned out to not be reliable. I won't go into the reasons why I in particular and why the researchers think things went wrong, but the damage it caused was very severe. Many people operating post offices on a franchise model ended up losing their entire life savings, going to prison. And there was at least one incident of a suicide as a result of accounting errors in a software package. So in a world where things like that can go wrong, I believe we have to be risk averse. We have to spend a long time thinking about what can go wrong and doing our best every step along the way to minimize the chance of things going wrong. So how do we do this? Well, as I said, risk management has been known about for a long time. It's been an active area of research, academically and in industry. There are quite a few standards around that include formal risk management processes that we can look to for guidance. Many of them from ISO, NIST, for example. There's a few examples up on the screen. Those of you who are used to risk management in project management perhaps might recognize some of those. But they have common themes. All of those frameworks have common themes and recommendations. And they basically say that project leaders should identify and record areas of risk and specific risks within those areas. And that we should think about, quantify, and record the potential damage of bad outcomes. Furthermore, we should identify, record, and enact mitigations to minimize both the likelihood of both the likelihood of a bad outcome occurring and the amount of damage that it might cause. And lastly, that we should continue to repeat that process time and time again, regularly. It's not something you can just do at the start of a project and then forget about. something we have to do constantly, and especially in a software engineering project like Mojaloop that's distributed around the world with many hundreds of contributors historically. It's something we have to do constantly. Risk management is not just an engineering concern. I know I stand here as the engineering director of the Mojaloop Foundation, but risks exist across every aspect of our domain. And we need to embed risk management in all of our processes, in the Mojaloop community in particular, but in our adoption programs as well. I care particularly myself about the way Mojaloop software is developed. Product thinking and feature design. Well, when we design and deliver our features, what risks are we creating for our adopters? Something I worry about a great deal. And I know our product folks, Paul Makin and the Product Council, give a great deal of thought to risk management as well. How can we minimize these risks? What features should we have to minimize risks? Do we need special features? Security features are a case in point. Well, yes, if there's a risk that somebody can penetrate your system and grant themselves $1 million into their account, we should have a feature to prevent that. Architectural thinking. Engineering involves a lot of compromises. Design in software engineering is primarily about making compromises. So we need to think about how we make those compromises. Which side of the compromise should we fall on? And in our day-to-day engineering processes, we need to employ mitigations to make sure we deliver correct. By correct, I mean software that does exactly what we expect it to do. Low-risk feature implementations. So right now, we do have lots of risk mitigations in place already in the Mojaloop community. We have our invariants at a very top level, which are the design principles we look to when we make compromises to help us decide, should we choose component X or component Y? We refer back to those invariants. We have design and code review requirements to make sure our feature implementations are correct and that they minimize risk. We have standards, published standards for component and tool choice. And we evaluate the risk. You will have heard Sam talk earlier about how we monitor known security vulnerabilities and risks in our software bill of materials, our third-party components. We have a lot of risk mitigation in that process already. Our cybersecurity architecture. If you're interested in that, it's documented on our documentation website. But we have specific processes and controls to minimize cybersecurity risks, as well as features. But this is a culture of continuous improvement. So when I took this role just over 18 months ago, I initiated a process of continual review of the way we assess, manage, and identify risks in the Mojaloop community. So there are some changes that we'd like to introduce. Firstly, around community process. We're going to start maintaining a central product engineering risk register. Maintaining a risk register is something you're probably familiar with if you've had management responsibility on large projects before. We're going to have a central one owned by the community. The foundation is going to facilitate the maintenance of that. We're going to have processes in workstream operational guidelines. So workstream leads and workstream contributors can contribute to the maintenance of that register as well. We want to improve the mitigations we've got for some already managed areas of risk. We're introducing some more formal processes for traceability, from feature identification before and during the product council when new features are being discussed, right through adoption by the product council, their integration into the roadmap, scrutiny of design by the design authority, code development and integration into a Mojaloop release. The new process will require a little bit of extra documentation, but it's certainly not a huge burden. But each step of the process, so we have traceability to look at a code change and be able to know which feature request was associated with it, and the other way around. Which code changes are associated with a particular feature request? Better traceability will help us deal with incidents. When somebody finds a bug, where did the bug come from? Traceability is a tool in our toolbox to help mitigate those risks. We're going to introduce better support for work streams from the Design Authority. The Design Authority has recently adopted a new charter. That's been put in place by the TGB, the Technical Governing Board of Mojaloop, which has clearer written definitions, change types, and risk levels, has clearer written guidance on mandatory design and code review, and the DA has been given more responsibility to run and operate that process. We've got improved written guidance for contributors right across the board coming as well. So please watch out for upcoming discussions on these things, the new risk register and the risk management processes in the Product Council. They'll be happening in Product Council, Community Council and the Design Authority. There are documentation updates currently being reviewed, so please expect those to be published in the coming weeks. Thank you very much. I've been told that we are running short of time and we're trying to catch up a bit, so I won't take any questions now, but if anybody wants to get involved with this topic, please reach out to me on Slack and I'll invite you to join the appropriate sessions in these community councils.